Good morning. I'm usually presiding, so I say good morning and welcome to, but you're home, and I've come back home in a way. It's so good to see all of you, and people who have just shot up. Wow, have you grown tall? Isn't it lovely when you can embarrass children that are all grown up? So anyway, yes, that's a good segue into what prompted me to explore the notion of is there a humanist tradition of contemplation? I always begin and end my platform addresses with poetry. So I open with Dew Light, and this is by W.S. Merwin. Now in the blessed days of more and less, when the news about time is that each day there is less of it, I know none of that. As I walk out through the early garden, only the day and I are here, with no before or after, and the dew looks up without a number or a present age. I like that sense of being in the now, being in the present, and with intention, being aware of our surroundings. So as Lynn said, I spent my summer sabbatical doing. Now, I was going to spend it kind of being aware of myself, and I looked into retreat centers and everything. But in the end, I did a lot. I traveled, I visited family and friends, I taught a couple of classes, I spent a week with the Encampment for Citizenship, so I was doing a lot. But one of those things that I did was to visit a dear friend of mine, a childhood friend, also named Anne with an E. We had that in common. Middle name's also Marie, so how did our teachers distinguish us? Well, one year I was Anne Marie, the other year she was Anne Marie, and I was just plain Anne. She became a St. Joseph nun. And I'll never forget the conversation that we had. She went to Nazareth College, which is in Rochester, and a school for Catholic women. And I remember at one time she said, I just don't know what to do, whether to become, a mother and have, 8 children, or to become a nun. And I said, Anne, there really is a lot of room in between that. And she just said, well, you and I are different people. Well, as it turns out over the years, we're not that different, because I became humanist clergy, and she, as a nun, went through quite an interesting process. As you probably are aware, there are fewer Catholic priests and nuns than there once were. So one of the things that she's had to deal with at the Mother House, at the St. Joseph nuns from the Rochester Diocese, is how do we continue to survive and thrive, given that there are fewer and fewer women becoming nuns? Well, one way about being strategic about this was to become a spiritual formation facilitator for people in other denominations. And so that's what she's done. And she started a place in the Finger Lakes area, not too far from Seneca Lake, called Cobblestone Spring. And this is a retreat center. That's an interfaith retreat center. So I had agreed, a couple of years ago, to give a course on humanism, and no one showed up. So when we thought about how to rework this a little bit, I said, Anne, I really don't understand it, because this area of the Finger Lakes, once called the Burnt Over District, because so many different religions came through there, and they would have their tent revivals. And they referred to people as, and their souls in particular, as being the fuel that would be burned by each one of these new movements. So it became known as the Burnt Over District. There were no more souls to save. But interestingly enough, Robert Ingersoll grew up, just down the road. He's the great agnostic. The women's movement in Seneca Falls. Susan B. Anthony, Frederick Douglass, great friends in Rochester. So there really is a lot of fertile ground there. So I started talking about it, and I said, Anne, humanism is as American as apple pie. And she said, that's the title we're going to give it, All American Humanism. So I showed up, and actually a few people did show up for this. And interestingly enough, and I'm sure that this has happened to you as well, when you've talked about ethical culture or humanism with friends and relatives, they've said, Well, yeah, that's what I am. I just didn't know it had a name. I didn't know you had communities. So sure enough, in the room, there was a Presbyterian, another Catholic nun, I think a Lutheran minister, whatever. And they said, well, yeah, that's what we are too. But we have, of course, I would call it this overlay of theism, of God language. But at its base, really, that's who they all were. Otherwise, they wouldn't be coming to an interfaith retreat center. Well, anyway, that night we had a silent meditation. A full hour of silence. Now, a New York minute for me, is about it. But to have a full hour. So there we were, sitting in one of the rooms of this beautiful cobblestone house, which over the course of 25 years they had renovated. And all we heard was the snuffling of the 3 dogs in the room. And quiet for an hour. And I got to say, I don't want to do it again soon, but it was a very good experience. And it was a good experience to be with these other women and animals and to experience that, to breathe deeply and to be with one another. Well, the next morning at breakfast, we were talking about that experience. And Anne asked me, so is there anything that you do in humanism akin to what we did last night? She said, I get it, that you read a lot, that you think a lot, that you talk a lot. Do you have a contemplative practice? And so I started thinking about it. And I said, I think in some ways we do, but it's nothing that we espouse as a particular ethical culture or humanist practice, because we're open to so many different things. Hence my handout of the contemplation tree, the tree of contemplation.
Handout is on the back table. Somebody forgot to put it out.
No, it's out. Everyone has it. Yep. Yes. Wave them at Arthur. We all have them. You'll notice that on one side there are words. And those words give you examples of different ways that we might be involved in a contemplative practice. Flip it over and it's blank. And that's where you can fill in the things that you do already. So I'm just going to introduce it and then I'm going to drop it there. And we'll come back to it later. Omid Safi is the director of Duke University's Islamic Studies Center. And he wrote a very nice essay called The Disease of Being Busy. I think a lot of us have that. It's a virus that's going around, right? He asked, when did we forget that we are human beings, not human doings? How are we supposed to live, to examine, to be, to become fully human when we are so busy? And then he talks about Muslim cultures. He says, how is your heart doing at this very moment, at this breath? That's what Muslims would ask one another. Examine your own heart, explore your soul, and then tell me something about your heart and your soul. Tell me you remember you're still a human being, not just a human doing. Tell me you're more than just a machine, checking off items from your to-do list. Have that conversation, that glance, that touch. Be a healing conversation, one filled with grace and presence. I just loved that essay and the way that he put it and the way he invites us to engage one another. He says, let us insist on a type of human-to-human connection where when one of us responds by saying, I'm just so busy, we can follow up by saying, I know, love, we all are, but I want to know how your heart is doing. I'm wondering if we can do that, So often we see one another, and the first thing we do is say hello, we hug, we shake hands, we kiss. How are you doing, right? Oh, fine, I'm fine. Or, it doesn't help to complain, nobody would listen. We kind of go through that, that's sort of a social tick, isn't it, that we do that? How would the conversation be different if we say, I know, love, we're all busy, but I want to know how your heart is doing. You know, in communities like ours, we can do that. We can do that because we know that that's what we're all about. Well, of course, I looked into how do we form a working definition of contemplative practice? And then, of course, I'm going to look at, what are its ethical implications? Well, Aristotle strongly implies that the pleasure of contemplation is the good, because in one way or another, all living beings aim at this sort of pleasure. That there's something about contemplation that gets at that part of human happiness. There are so many different aspects of it, as I referred to on the contemplation tree. How many of you have read Juliet Cameron's book, The Artist's Way? It's gone through a few publications now, right? And what's lovely about that is it develops a ritual of morning pages to unclog one's mental and emotional channels, reframing a negative thought with these disarmingly simple practices. And it's so important to reframe those negative thoughts. Our colleague Joan Johnson Lewis some years ago really studied neuroscience and brain cognitive science, and she brought to the other leaders Dan Siegel's book about mindfulness, and she wanted to look at it in a way that wasn't as woo-woo as perhaps other traditions, but really ground it in science and ground it in neuroscience. And one of the things that she learned and she passed along to us is human beings' proclivity, one might say hardwired into us, of having negative thoughts. It has to do with our amygdala back here, that reptile brain that has that fight, flight, or freeze notion whenever we feel challenged in some way and anxious about something. So we have the choice to reframe that. And apparently there's a number that you need 5 positive thoughts to overcome one negative thought. That we're just, we're in that mind of negativity. So given that, we do have a choice to reframe that in some way. Some people have what they call a gratitude journal, writing down the things that we're grateful for throughout the day. Finding some way of reframing those negative thoughts and putting us into that frame of mind. My practice that I try to keep is when I go out in the morning, I live in a brownstone in Brooklyn, so there's a stoop. So I stand at the top of my stoop and I look up the block and down the block. I look to see who of my neighbors is out. If Tommy next door is out, I always say, "Hi, Tommy," and he blows me a kiss. If nobody's there, I just sort of look around and see, especially this time of year, what trees are budding, what's going on. And take that first deep cleansing breath that engages my diaphragm and my whole body. Take that first deep cleansing breath before I walk down the steps of my stoop and walk towards the subway. And I try to feel a sense of gratitude to the universe, to being alive. What a mystery and a miracle it is that we're here at all, right? And so feeling that gratitude. And I try to carry that with me. It's hard on the subway, but I try to carry that with me. And then at the end of the day, when I come back, I do have that moment of saying, okay, what did I do today? What did I do in terms of my interactions with people? It's sort of an accounting. How can I do it better tomorrow? Was there someone I kind of blew off and gave short shrift to? Was there someone I said that I was going to call and never did? And will it be more than just on my to-do list tomorrow? So I think that's my contemplative practice. It's sort of a review. It's taking a deep breath, I'm alive, going out my day, coming home and saying, I'm still here, I still have things to do. And rather than feeling guilty about it and feeling shame that I haven't done it, trying to transform that into, okay, let's make it better tomorrow. Maybe I didn't call that person because I wasn't fully present. So I'll wait until I'm fully present to do that. There's a lovely essay also by Efrat Livni. It's called A Guide to Making More Time by Cultivating Everyday Awe. Right? And of course now, spring, finally, I think we're really looking for that moment of awe in nature, aren't we? He wrote, "You do not need to stop and closely notice what's going on wherever you are, or you do need, rather, to do that. Because when you do, awe will follow." And he talks about taking a walk through Central Park with a Zen Buddhist monk who exclaimed while in the park, "This is your temple," and spontaneously initiated a walking meditation, still taking the steps, but just more deliberately to emphasize the point. But one of my favorite monks is Thich Nhat Hanh, and he has a lovely book called Walking Meditations. And he said, sometimes contemplative practices are not always peaceful and stress-free. In fact, sometimes some may be more gentle and others more rigorous, but all practices are intended to be challenging and to be fully there. So I want to read you something about a walking meditation from him, and I'm going to find it. Yes, I am. Here we go. It's paying attention to the way that we put our foot on the path, the way that we deliberately take each step and notice who we are and what we're doing. And there's a way that sometimes, if we're filled with anger and we're aware of that, we can consciously transform that. Well, because we're also a thinking crowd, I'm going to bring in some studies here. So there are studies that say that if we take time to notice and be amazed, that it makes us healthier, happier, and even expands our perceptions of time. And that's from a Berkeley psychologist, Dr. Keltner, who's a co-author of a study. He said, awe, wonder, and beauty promote healthier levels of cytokines, which are molecules that help cells communicate. And it suggests that the things that we do to experience these emotions, a walk in nature, losing oneself in music, beholding art, has a direct influence upon our health. Another study that was taken on by the University of Minnesota and Stanford says awe seems to expand an individual's sense of vastness. Experiences of awe bring people into the present moment, and being in the present moment underlies awe's capacity to adjust time perception, influence decisions, and make life feel more satisfying than otherwise. Right? We're getting into the realm of ethics here, aren't we, if it's influencing our decisions. Even a simple ritual like making morning coffee or tea can help bring you into the present. Jane Kenyon, another one of my favorite poets, wrote, "Coming home in twilight in late summer. We turned into the drive and gravel flew up from the tires like sparks from a fire. So much to be done. The unpacking, the mail and papers, the grass needed mowing. We climbed stiffly out of the car. The shut-off engine ticked as it cooled. And then we noticed the pear tree. The limbs so heavy with fruit, they nearly touched the ground. We went out to the meadow. Our steps made black holes in the grass. And we each took a pear and ate and were grateful." Here's a couple coming home and having lots to do, and yet they allow themselves, they give themselves that permission to follow their instincts, right? To go into the meadow, to pick a pear, to eat it. We often say, take time to smell the roses. We also need to take time to eat the pears. Whatever it is, to bring us in touch with ourselves. Michael Gutteridge is a psychiatrist who focuses on workplace behavior. And he wrote an essay called Wasting Time, about recharging your battery and decluttering. He says, there's an idea we must always be available, work all the time. It's hard to break out of that and just go to the park. Even Victorian factories had some kind of rest breaks. But do we? I mean, I love my iPhone, but I find that even when I'm taking a walk, and on Friday I decided that I was going to walk home from Grand Central Station. I didn't decide at Grand Central Station to walk home. First I walked to 20th Street, and then I walked down to another place, and I said, I'm so close to the Brooklyn Bridge, why don't I cross there? But what made it guilt-free for me was I had my iPhone with me. So I could answer emails, I could answer phone calls, I could stay connected to my work even while I was walking. And I thought, what's up with this? Why am I doing this? Why can't I just take a walk for walk's sake? I still enjoyed the walk. I enjoyed being on the Brooklyn Bridge, and I got some work done. But how can we separate that out? After all, as he says, even in Victorian factories, you had a rest break. There's a law now in France that you don't send or accept emails when you're outside of working hours. I can't imagine that, can you? I can't imagine it. Spending time alone, the best way to rest, reading in nature, listening to music, doing nothing in particular. A study carried out by BBC in conjunction with a number of universities and disciplines, including neuroscience and anthropology, which was directed by Felicity Collard, a professor of social science at the University of Durham, said, the discourse of busyness is everywhere. That sense of boasting or status coming from being incredibly busy and productive. At the same time, people think it's unsustainable. But rest seems like this unattainable thing. Charles Simic wrote a poem called To Boredom. I'm the child of rainy Sundays. I watched time crawl like an injured fly over the wet window pane, or waited for a branch on a tree to stop shaking, while my grandmother knitted, making a ball of yarn roll over like a kitten at her feet. I knew every clock in the house had stopped ticking, and this day would last forever. Remember a time when we used to do that? I used to climb a tree in my side yard and take a book up with me because I knew if my mother found me, she'd make me do chores. But she couldn't find me if I was up in the tree. Raymond Carver wrote a poem called Loafing. I looked into the room a moment ago, and this is what I saw. My chair in its place by the window. The book turned face down on the table, and on the sill, the cigarette left burning in its ashtray. Malingerer, my uncle yelled at me so long ago. He was right. I've set aside time today, same as every day, for doing nothing. Nothing at all. Well, does contemplation make us better people? And the answer is yes, absolutely. I have a dear friend who's both at Columbia and NYU with me, Toyen Pak, and she's a Buddhist minister. It's the Won Buddhism from Korea that she's a member of. And she said, meditation isn't all about sitting on a cushion. You do it so that you can rise from the cushion and you can engage with other people in an ethical way. Because the time on the cushion has put you back in touch with yourself. You have regained authenticity. You are present in the moment. You're aware of your surroundings and of your own existence, of other people and their needs. Right? If you're just sitting on the cushion, navel-gazing, then you're not really engaging in mindfulness. It doesn't stop there. It's not a quest for nirvana. It's a quest for better relationships with people and for better engagement in your environment. Now, sometimes this is misused. Thomas Joyner wrote a book called Mindfulness, The Corruption of Mindfulness in a Culture of Narcissism. And what he points out is there are now so many self-help books, so many tapes, so many apps for mindfulness, for meditation. But what are they selling? They're selling a more efficient you, a more effective you on your job. Not just to be you, a human being. It's about how can you be stress-free? How can you work better on your job? And he said that the problem has somewhat less to do with how mindfulness is practiced and more to do with how it's promoted. There's an overselling of the benefits and focus on self-care. So he has a real skepticism about the benefits of it because he says that can be a distraction. He says, forget all of that. Just take a walk. Just go take a walk. I think so much of this also is about finding a balance in our mortal lives and knowing that we are mortal. And I think that knowledge is a real gift because it means that every moment must count. It really must count. Felix Adler had something to say about this, of course, and he invites us to sort of think of spirituality, if you will, as a kind of river. And he wrote, if river had a consciousness like the human consciousness, we might imagine that it hears the murmur of the distant sea from the very moment when it leaves its source. And that murmur grows clearer and clearer as the river flows on its way, welcoming every tributary. It receives these tributaries as adding to the volume which will contribute to the sea, rejoicing at every turn and bend in its long course that brings it nearer to its goal. And he wrote, such is the consciousness of spiritually minded human beings. Imagine that flow of water, that flow of river with every tributary coming into it. My closing poem is by Evan Boland. It's called This Moment. A neighborhood at dusk. Things are getting ready to happen out of sight. Stars and moths and rind slanting around fruit, but not yet. One tree is black. One window is yellow as butter. A woman leans down to catch a child who has run into her arms. This moment. Stars rise, moths flutter, apples sweeten in the dark. So I invite you now to just take a moment, eyes open or closed as you wish. Maybe put your hand on your diaphragm so you can feel that life-giving breath as you inhale and your diaphragm contracting as you exhale. Being present to yourself and aware of everyone around you in this room. I invite you to imagine that river of which Felix Adler speaks as being inside you and moving throughout your body and then flowing outside your body all around this room. That river of goodness to which all of us as tributaries can contribute. We feel the ebb and flow of water along the beach. We feel the current of water in the rivers. And we know that that connects us to our true selves and the true selves of everyone around us. So that we can elicit the goodness in others and in ourselves. Continue to breathe deeply in and out. And when you feel comfortable, open your eyes and look around the room. See the gift that you are to everyone here and that you are to everyone else. As founder Felix Adler said, we are not meant to be saved, but rather to be recognized. Thank you.